Hello my dear friends, you're on the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 12th of April of 2023. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. And of course we're going to start with Archomovsk, because the most important updates are coming from this area. If we take a look at the Russian deployment map, you're gonna see that this map has been updated, and according to the latest version of this map, we see that there's just one block in the central part of Bakhmut that still remains under Ukrainian control. There is a small part of the bus station, but not the bus station itself, something like behind the bus station, maybe some kind of industrial area, and there is a residential area on the south. And as you can see, according to this map, the Ukrainian controls the road and the bridge. I believe that this bridge was destroyed. I don't remember exactly, but I understand as we see that there is a small road that Ukrainians are able to control. Maybe they controlled and they had this road for supplying support to the central part, and now they're using this road for evacuation and the final retreating from the central part of Bakhmut. During the previous 24 hours, the Russians published a lot of video and photo confirmation of the situation around this railroad station. They published video and photo of destroyed, how the Russians bombed this area heavily. They shown that like just the ruins left from this territory. Furthermore, don't forget that yesterday we discussed that there is a 241st Territorial Defense Brigade, and some sources are saying that this is exactly that brigade that took a decision to step back and to leave their position without receiving or any confirmation from the military authorities, military commander forces. So that was the reason why the Ukrainians lost the railroad station so fast. Furthermore, some sources are saying that the Russians managed to cross the railroad ways and to establish a small bridgehead on the western part of Bakhmut, somewhere along the railroad ways. But maybe this is some kind of speculation just to force and to push the Ukrainians to make some media victory or something like this. But anyway, the situation for the Ukrainians is critical. And the thing is that now the final chapter of the battle for Bakhmut started. There is a clashes in the western part, and the Russians don't need to cross the long wide streets like Krusunkova Street or the railroad ways. They don't need to, let's say, to cross the railroad ways and to enter the northern part, because the Russians are already there. And there is just a question of time when the Russians are able to get the outskirts of this western bloc, because this is the final area and this is the final block where the Ukrainians are going to give the final battle for the western part of Bakhmut. This is going to be a very bloody battle, I believe so. But before discuss this final battle, I believe that we need to go back to the Western sources map and to update this area according to the information we have, according to today. Furthermore, I would like to add that according to my understanding of the situation, I believe that the western part, the central part, has been taken already. And you know that it's very difficult to publish information about the progress on the ground during the day, because for these purposes you need to have internet connection. And of course, from the according to the security perspective, the soldiers and correspondents on the ground, they need to leave the combat line and to get as close as possible to the internet connection. And after that, they can publish material, they can publish new maps and so on. So that's why I believe that maybe today, during the next 10 hours, we're going to receive the final confirmation of establishing entire control over the central part. So that's why I took a decision to update this map as I understand the situation. Furthermore, when talking about the south, the Russians have already established control over these blocks, and this is the situation around Krusunskova and Tchaikovskого Street. When talking about the northern part of Bakhmut, we know that the Russians have already taken control over some areas in on these blocks, and this is the progress, approximately the progress on the north. So this is the situation in Bakhmut. We know that Ukrainians' main forces are, and not the main forces, but the most important block from the Ukrainian side is this one, let's say that located on the southwest part of the western part. Another important area is the area on the north where the Russians are pushing, and this is the area that, according to the information we have, the 241st Brigade took a decision to step back and to leave. And the final one is the area along the railroad ways. So this is the main blocks, and this is the main areas that Ukrainians were trying to prepare defense. And they chose these areas for one reason, because there are a lot of big buildings, a lot of floor buildings, and it is much more easier to to create some defense in this area. And all the areas around these 3 blocks is residential area with low buildings, and most of them, as you can see, are under Russian control. Now let's return back to the deployment map, and there are also a lot of very interesting information. As you can see, we can split this territory in many blocks, also in many parts, and we see that the western part, this one, is under protection or defense of the volunteer corps and the let's say international battalions like Belarusian forces, like Georgian forces, Chechen forces. These brigades used to be on the central part of Bakhmut, but during the previous weeks they were defeated, pretty damaged, and the Ukrainian commanders took a decision to evacuate those forces to the western part of Bakhmut. But as you can see, these brigades are still there, and we understand why, because for now it's highly unlikely that anybody are able to evacuate from the Bakhmut. But even though you see that these brigades are located in the, let's say, in the most important cross, in the most important like interception of the streets, because you see this road, and for now this is the only safe road that the force can use for evacuation process. So these brigades, volunteers, are deployed as close as possible to these roads. So if everything goes wrong, they are going to be the first who will leave Archomovsk, and they will evacuate to Chasiv Yar. I'm not saying that they're going to do this and to save all their forces and stuff. They will receive a lot of damage from anti-artillery fire, but anyway. The second block is this territory where I told you a few minutes ago that this is going to be the last battle, the last clashes, and the final battle for Bakhmut. This territory is under control of the Ukrainian special forces, the most powerful, the most experienced, well-trained forces, whose main job is to hold this bridgehead as long as possible and not to allow the Russians to establish control over this area, not even to enter there. Because if the Russians are able to do this, the entire 10-15,000 group will be captured immediately. The third group is the group that located between the special forces block and, let's say, southern and the central part of Bakhmut, this one. As you can see, from perspective of the quality of the forces, this is the area where we can find the second most powerful forces. Because there are territorial defense forces, there are mechanized brigades, there are some parts of motorized brigade. So they're also very important because they understand that, as you can see, there is a very wide, big combat line, and they need to keep forces there. And I believe that Ukrainians suppose, and they think that when talking about the value of the regions, this is the second value region in this area. And the last block is the northern block, under protection of territorial defense brigade and, let's say, border detachments and not very powerful and experienced forces. So we understand that Ukrainians took a decision to pay less attention to the north, and this area is less important for them. But from my understanding of the situation, the northern one is the most important part of Archomovsk. So we see 4 blocks: the volunteer blocks, special forces block, most powerful and trained Ukrainian regular army block, and territorial defense and border detachment forces on the north. And from this perspective, we understand that the easiest solution for the Russians and the easiest way for them, if they want to continue their offensive operation for the Russians, is to attack in direction of the forces, less trained and less powerful forces. I'm talking about the northern part. So let's go back to and when talking about this map, so we understand that they lack blocks, the defense areas, and I'm saying in my understanding that within the next few days, I'm not sure about that fact that the Russians are going to start this offensive operation before the Easter, but anyway, the Russians are saying, at least the Russian church reported and told us, that they would not ask Russian authorities to start any ceasefire, because we know that there are a lot of repressions, a lot of bad things that Ukrainians currently are doing against the Russian church on the territory of Ukraine. So this is the reason why the Russian church took a decision not to ask President of Russian Federation to start any ceasefire period during this Easter holidays. So the Russians are going to go to the south, so in this direction, along this railroad station. As you can see, their flank is already protected because the Russians have already established control over the northern part. They will go exactly in direction of the 241st Brigade to the south, and they will try to encircle this railroad station from the west. Maybe this area is already under Russian control. And the thing is that the second reason why the Russians are going to go exactly in this way is that on the west from this line, this one is the residential area with the very big buildings, this one. And I believe that Ukrainians do have their position there. And if you remember, the Russians established this bridgehead maybe 2 weeks ago, or maybe a week ago, and since that time they haven't developed this bridgehead. And the reason is that it's very difficult to push in direction of big buildings. And the Russians understand this. And the only possible solution for them is somehow to encircle this area and to cut this area from supply and support. And to do this, they need to go along this small buildings residential area to the south, along the railroadways in direction of the central box, this central barracks. You see there is a barracks. If we take a look at this map, we see there's some buildings and so on. If we go to the western source map, we see that there is something like empty square. But this is, I don't know, maybe ex-military base, but there are a lot of barracks. They're very low. And of course, as I understand currently, when talking about the entire defense of Bakhmut operation or storm operation from the Russian side, this is the most important block. And I understand that the Russians are targeting this area right exactly in the heart of western Bakhmut, western Archomovsk. And if the Russians are able to take this blue cloud or establish control over these barracks, then they will be able to cut every single, and they will be able to split every single block in this area into small parts. With this attack in direction of this central barracks, the Russians will be able to force the Ukrainians that located let's go back to the west source, in this first, defense block, to step back in direction of the volunteer forces. Also, attack in this area will force the Ukrainians to step back from the area in the vicinity of the railroad ways. And furthermore, we understand that the Russians will do the same from the south, trying to make some kind of pin-down operation, to pin down the Ukrainian forces, to freeze them, and not to allow them to be flexible and mobile. So this is the heart of the Western defense or offensive operation. And the Russians are going to attack there with one purpose: to collapse and to ruin the entire Ukrainian defense orders. And to do this is not a very big deal, because there are no big buildings on the Russians' way. There are just a few residential blocks with small buildings, and we know that the Russians are very professional storming and clearing this type of area, and I believe that there are going to be no resistance even from the Ukrainian side. Now let's discuss about more piece of news that were coming from Archomovsk or Bakhmut. The Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation reported that during the previous 24 hours, as a result of storming operation from the Wagner PMC, they managed to establish control over another 3 blocks. The Ministry of Defense didn't provide the real information about the real blocks or coordinates or the titles of those blocks, but they just were trying to show the progress and the vector or direction of the entire progress of the storming in this area. Furthermore, the Russians reported that Ukrainians were trying to send some reserves from Konstantinovka in direction of Bakhmut, but those convoys were discovered by the Russians and destroyed by artillery attack. As a result of clashes in the vicinity of this area during the previous 24 hours, the Ukrainians lost 245 soldiers, 15 armored vehicles including 1 tank, and 6 artillery systems. There is another icon that says showing the area where the Ukraine lost another artillery system. So as you can see, the losses are very heavy, and we are like on the final page of this story for Battle for Bakhmut. Furthermore, the Russians, now we are going to the next front line, and the second front line, the value is that brought us today a lot of updates, a lot of interesting piece of news, is Zaporozhye and South Donetsk front line. I didn't expect that the Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation is going to provide such a number from this area, but this is very interesting. We need to wait for another day. We need to see the report from this area for tomorrow. Maybe the numbers will be changed, and the numbers that we received today is just some kind of, I don't know, lucky operation from the Russian side or something like this, because the Russians reported that as a result of clashes, artillery duels, and many other types of operation that took place in this area, the Ukrainians lost 193 soldiers, 12 armored vehicles, and 2 artillery systems. So we can say that this is the heaviest losses of the Ukrainians in this area. It's very difficult to understand where exactly the Ukrainians lost so much, but we know that the Russians started using their guided bombs. And if you remember, yesterday we discussed Archomovsk, so let's increase the number of we discussed Archomovsk, and for example, for the previous 3 days, as you can see, Orekhov is under very heavy fire. So the Russians attack Orekhov in the central part. This is some kind of school or college. The Russians attacked these hangars and barracks on the west side of Orekhov, and the Russians destroyed another farm, or it's a farm, I believe, on the southern part of Orekhov. Also, the Russians attacked the Ukrainian forces on the south of this area, and maybe the losses, the number they provided is the result of attacks using the guided bombs in this area. Very possible, very likely that it is exactly about this, because there were no reports about any offensive or counter-offensive operation from any side, and the only updates we were receiving from this area is about updates about the artillery duels using the usage of the guided bombs. So as you can see, the guided bombs that the Russians use currently can be a game changer in this game, in this special operation. We see that Ukrainians don't have anything to show from their side. First of all, they don't have air forces to use the guided bombs, and the air forces they have can be destroyed, shut down by the Russian air defense system. So the Ukrainians have very big problems. And as you can see, this is also very interesting update, very interesting thing that I mentioned. Who can tell me, I'm asking you, if you are able, maybe you can remember, who can tell me when the Russians were using a massive missile attack against the Ukraine? To tell the truth, the last massive attack the Russians made, I believe, in January or February, very long time ago. So massive and with a very big result, and that was somewhere in the same days when the Russians penetrated Ukraine defense orders in Solidar and managed to penetrate and break through. From one side, we see that the Russians took a decision to use a cheaper way to destroy Ukrainian forces using the guided bombs, because they're more powerful than rockets, and they also can be, and then the targets can be attacked within 17 kilometers before the target. So this is a very effective and very powerful type of weapon, and much more cheaper than using and building missiles like Caliber and Dagger and so on. And from this, the first positive benefit for the Russians. The second positive benefit for the Russians is that since the final last missile attack in Geran and drone attack, I believe that the Russians managed to accumulate significant number of missiles and significant number of drones in this area. And this is also very important, because we understand that sooner or later the Ukrainians are going to start counter-offensive operation. They want to continue receiving some kind of supply and support from the Western countries, and using these missiles, the significant number of missiles, the Ukrainians can lose even without starting their offensive operation. When talking about Kherson area, the situation is the same as used to be before. The Ukraine lost 50 soldiers, 9 armored vehicles as a result of artillery duels in this area. So nothing special in this area. Furthermore, when talking about Kupiansk and Liman front line, the Russians continue reporting that as a result of artillery duels and as a result of clashes in this area, the Russians managed, I believe, for the 7th or the 8th time in a row to break the Ukrainian plans to complete or to make some kind of normal rotation. This is very important, because the forces, Ukrainian forces that located along Zhiribets river, are very exhausted. They are on this combat line maybe since the autumn of the previous year. They want to have a normal rotation, they want to have a normal supply and support, and because of this empty space that is under complete Russian control, they can't even bring normal supply and support in this area, and of course they're always under heavy Russian fire, and this can, at some certain point of time, this can break the entire situation, and this situation can lead to a thing when the Russian can do just one small push and the entire front line is going to collapse. So we'll see. Anyway, the Russians are saying that as a result of these artillery duels and like breaking rotation process, the Ukrainians lost 110 soldiers, 9 armored vehicles and 3 artillery systems. Not much, but the main thing is not to reduce the manpower, but not to allow to make a normal rotation. This is also very important, because if you remember, the reason why the Russians established control over the central part and the northern part was the absence of the normal rotation, when the 241st Brigade took a decision just to leave their position because they were too much tired to to survive. They were too much tired to survive. They were tired to survive. So that's why maybe the same situation, the absence of the normal rotation can bring to the same situation in Kupiansk and Liman front line, when some parts and groups of Ukrainian army will just take a decision to leave, or even worse, to surrender to the Russians. So we'll see. Anyway, we'll see. Furthermore, today some Western sources are saying that the United States of America started working on creation of new documents, and they're calling this document as the peace agreement in Ukrainian favor. So they're saying that they believe that Ukrainians are able to win, and they have already prepared some kind of document. We'll see, because it's very difficult to judge without seeing this document. But I believe that they're nothing special and just another media things that the Western countries want to create to, let's say, to reduce the Russian spirit or will to fight. And that's it for today. Military Summer channel reminds to condemn any violence in Ukraine. Thank you for your watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.